To add a particle system, you have to go to Hierarchy and add new effects with this name. Then in Inspector, you can change it according to your own needs. The cavern was constructed from a few different snap-together objects. I give all objects, like walls, chairs, rocks, swords, a component, box collider. This changes the physics of the object. Our character is not able to pass through these meshes. For every finished object, I created a prefab for refactoring already completed meshes, so I do not have to work twice on the same object. Some of the objects I created in Blender, like chairs, I made with really simple meshes, and I added the material in Unity. To put music in your game, you have to choose a good place for your sound. You can create an empty object, or you can use some of the objects in your game. Next, you add to this mesh a component, audio source. To create water in Unity, I use a prefab which you can download in Unity Assets. The best option for this is to create some space where you will install your lake. If you will raise the terrain a tiny bit, you can make a perfect space for a water prefab in your game. To make mountains and hills, I use my terrain. In Inspector, I choose the option to raise terrain. I changed the settings and I started to create my environment. When I had already finished all bases of my outside world, I go to Inspector and use Paint option in Terrain. I select the appropriate textures for grass, mountains, etc. To create trees in the game, I use the next option in Inspector on my terrain. Place trees. In Inspector, I found prefabs with trees and I choose distance, height, brush size, etc. The same for creating grass. I choose options for this. I choose prefabs from Unity environments. I change some settings in Inspector and I started to apply grass on my terrain. create the sky, I had to go to Window, choose Lighting, and in the setting choose the right texture for my sky. The sword was created in Blender. The first step is to upload your background image. Next, I created a new mesh, basic cube, and I started to extrude the edges. When I got the basic shape, I began to manipulate the vertices to create the real shape of the sword. Then I marked the seams to unwrap my object, and like this, got an image of all the sides of my mesh. In Photoshop, I had to apply images, which I got in Blender. Then I could start working on the textures of my sword. I tried to use different textures in order to make my mesh look more realistic and resemble a real sword. Making animations for my sword was slightly complicated. First, I had to put my sword in the right place on my first-person controller. I create a script in MonoDevelop using a code I wrote specifically for these actions and movements. I then add a component of sound for the script. Then, on the sword, I add a new component, animation. Next, I create a new animation and name it. Then I go to Window and I choose Animation. Add a property, Position and Rotation. After this, I add the key and I press Recording mode. I start to change position and rotation of my sword. When I finished, I press play to see my animation. Finally, in Inspector, I drag the script of animation and of a sound. To add blah.
Do you want to read it first and then try and record?
No.
Because there's some words you might not know.